Hey, what's up, guys? Disclosure Artist here. Welcome back. I'm going to be discussing another video um, regarding Christmas and how I feel it's completely wrapped up with disclosure. Um, Robert Zemeckis, in general, not just because of his relationship with Steven Spielberg professionally, I think has been trying to drop little hints throughout a good amount of his movies over the years, specifically the Christmas-related films that he's made. That being The Polar Express and A Christmas Carol, the Jim Carrey version, the Tom Hanks and the Jim Carrey movies. Not only is it based on a strange book from the 1980s, but it very clearly opens up with a child who's questioning his reality. The kid actually gets out of bed, checks his sources, flips through a book um, with regard to information about the North Pole, and of course, according to William Tompkins, most of the books in the world are filled with misinformation. And of course, when he gets to the page about the North Pole, it says that it's barren and devoid of life. Now, this might be the case on the surface. That's not to say that there aren't cloaked structures there, subterranean structures. So it's a dilemma. It's an internal struggle with the kid who's looking for information to cross-reference what he, in his soul, believes to be untrue. And it's a dilemma. And it's frustrating to watch because no matter where he looks, he won't get the truth unless he experiences it himself. So, of course, he begins to fall asleep and the clock just completely stops, which is to suggest a temporal interference. He's now having a divergent timeline or some stolen time that essentially can be taken advantage of, much the way that technology for 20 back is used, where they exploit a certain amount of time that is accessible. And you can see that because he looks at his clock and it's not moving. So a train appears out of a Zendra, essentially, which is an interdimensional cloud which allows for beings of different vibrations to exist in the same space, to occupy the same atmosphere. So this train just appears out of this cloud because, I mean, obviously there's no tracks in the middle of the street. So we know we're dealing with some interdimensional vehicle here. He, after getting on board the train, sees out the window an automaton. He sees the gears in the back of a Santa Claus automaton. So in his mind, this is proof that magic isn't real, which is just frustrating. I've recently spoken to a child who's very young, and she looked me in the eye and said that magic wasn't real, and I had to explain to her that not in the sense that science would explain it, it's spirituality. There are things that are more amazing that we can't ever put words to because we're not allowed to know about them, but magic is most definitely real. And I'm not just talking about advanced technology, I'm talking about co-creative consciousness and the things that we can't see or just don't know about. Magic is real. So I said to her, and I set her straight. Basically, this is a magical vehicle that picks up only children of a certain age, each of them for a different reason, because each of them has a different lesson to learn. I'd say that the ghost on the roof sympathizes with the kid about not wanting to be fooled, and he uses the expression, he says, you don't want to be bamboozled, have the wool pulled over your eyes, you don't want to be railroaded. So that's just to suggest that it's not really a train. The vehicle can appear however it wants to, be that, whatever it needs to be for a child. It could be a pirate ship, but whatever it is, it's suggesting that it's not what it seems, and they need to use some deception in order to tell a deeper truth to the children, so as to keep them comfortable and not overwhelmed with fear, as they might be if it was 100% clear. The protagonist is a little boy, probably under age 10, and while he's on the train, there's a scene where he sees a Scrooge puppet who's either really yelling at him or he's imagining him yelling at him, telling him that he's a doubter and that seeing is believing. So they're now, later on in the movie, taken to a subterranean railroad station which has multi-directional tunnels, which later gives way to a scene where they disclose a fully operational subterranean maglev high-speed vacuum train that we have running underneath our planet. This is something that they're using exclusively in the North Pole in the film, but the means at which people get into the vehicle and it takes off, I'd say, are extremely realistic and extremely accurate to the true life technology. According to the likes of Emery Smith and many other whistleblowers and people who are just coming forward with the truth. Later on, the kids are lifted. They're airlifted essentially by, while they're in a sack full of presents, by an industrial. They go through what appears to be industrial subterranean base doors, much like the ones that David Adair described during his trip to Area 51 when he was a youth. He remembers that the cogs and gears on the walls were so massive they had to be several hundred tons just to get this structure to move. So yeah, it just gives you an idea of how much space it occupies. So as the movie progresses towards the end, the kid, the protagonist, he can't see Santa because essentially the things that he's trying to focus on, this super being Santa Claus, can't really be seen with the eyes, but rather with the mind, and that's of course how we actually process information. We're not really seeing with our eyes. Our eyes, of course, are just filters. Our brain is kind of the processor, which is why, yeah, I can get into that later. He can't also hear the bells that are ringing on the reindeers because you're not really hearing with your ears. Again, you're hearing with your brain. If you're not prepared to process certain levels of information, I don't think as a protective mechanism, perhaps your senses will compartmentalize for the sake of protecting you, and you won't be able to experience those sensories, such as sight and sound. And of course, he doesn't fully accept the reality until he physically feels it in his fingers. So in that scene, one of the bells actually comes loose from the reindeer, where he's able to pick it up and feel it in his hand and actually press it between the flesh grip of his digits. That is when he knows that this is real. Of course, after this adventure has ended, he's talking about how it fell silent for his sister eventually as she grew up and faced the real world and was distracted by whatever programming she had. She eventually couldn't hear the ringing of the bell, but he always was able to hear it no matter what for the rest of his life. And I think it's greatly in part due to the fact that he had this adventure, he had this experience, and he was able to see in person and really experience. And that's what takes you from that 99% of believing versus 100% over the line, and you no longer believe, you just know. And of course his parents couldn't hear it at all because they're older and they're programmed and they're conditioned and they're completely shut off to it, and their radar is completely blocked from it. Much like the way in The Last Mimsy, which I can do a review on in the future, they just don't recognize these toys from the future. They appear to be just rocks. And yeah, again, another hidden in plain sight, fully loaded disclosure film right there. And it's interesting because even in a classic tale like A Christmas Carol, that was the Polar Express, he still is able to slip in a piece of high technology, and it's during the scene where, this is not the only time a man has been given a glimpse of, from an angel or a ghost, at the concept of him not existing. This happens in movies like Mr. Destiny with James Belushi, The Family Man with Nicolas Cage, It's a Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart. Again, these are all kind of angelic occurrences. But in this particular rendition, when he meets the ghost of Christmas Present, the house takes off from the ground pretty much like a high performance anti-gravitic vehicle, and the floor becomes translucent, and they're able to spy on essentially anybody whose house they fly over, much like a Wonka Vader from Willy Wonka. And I thought this is a fantastic demonstration of what I think is going on directly above most of our roofs at night when we're sitting on the couch just relaxing. These vehicles are parked above our places of residence, and they can see into our lives just with as much ease as demonstrated in that scene. I have my sources. Anyway, this has been my Zemeckis review of Christmas Disclosure, and I entice all of you to see the films for yourself with newly focused lenses and tell me what you think. All right, take care, and Merry Christmas.